This question gets asked a lot, what led you to be a writer? And I'm sometimes wary of my own answer because it's easy retroactively to create a sort of mythology of your own kind of, founding moment as a writer. That said, I know when I was quite young, I wanted to be a writer, starting in elementary, what you would call primary school, I guess. And I was very interested in poetry. So I wrote poems, from the time I could write. I was an early reader. But then when I was about 16 years old, I got interested in politics. So I studied political economy, actually, at university. And then when I was finished with that, I was faced with that inevitable moment that all young people are faced with of what to do with yourself. And it was a long, semi-inchoate process. But the novel, for me, it should be a quite open form. And yet, even as that, it seemed to make the most of who I am and what my experiences are, and became a way to utilize many different aspects of my sensibility, like no, for instance, academic discipline I could have chosen. And so, to the best that I can try to account for how I became a writer, I think it's that the novel activated aspects of my character that nothing else to which I could have dedicated myself would do. For some reason, I'm actually, as a writer, not so much as a reader, but as a writer, I'm somewhat suspicious of character. I think that I fear it has invisible ideological underpinnings, this reliance on what I think of as a kind of 20th century subjectivity, the idea that these characters are real and that by tapping into them, I can give the reader a sense of what these people are like and what their desires are and what their psychological construction has been. And for me, the novel should be chafing at that a bit and pushing against it. And so I think that actually with this new book that I wrote, The Flamethrowers, I tried in a way to get around the subjectivity of the central storyteller in the book. So her voice, what that means for me is that her voice is not actually a voice. For me, it's more like thought, so that what's rendered on the page is not inflected in any kind of idiomatic manner. Because when people speak, they are presenting themselves, even if they're speaking privately, in one of the classical forms, like with soliloquy. It's something like a confession. But my narrator is not meant to be a spoken voice. That said, she is there to witness the speaking voices of many other characters around them. And so that's my opportunity to perform dialogue, which is quite fun, but it's also done at a certain remove from me so that the reader doesn't have the experience of character, I think in the sense that you ask about, in terms of a primacy of character as the driving engine of the narrative of the book. And for me, it's not really the case. It evolved, I think. As a student of the modernist novel, my antecedents are writers for whom the primacy of perception is everything. But there's a way in which, like I said before, about sort of chafing against certain constructs, I chafe a little bit against this primacy of perception. I think that perception sometimes is not such a unified thing. This is who this person is. This is what they want in the world. This is where they come from. These are the traumas that have shaped them. I think that perception and existence is much more multifarious in a way. And so, it's a difficult thing to talk about, but it did evolve. I think that, to a certain degree, the formation of the character of the narrator, for me, exists in a register. Like once I get the tone of it, then I know something about the story and about who she is, but I was never really thinking about her as this formed and very specific person. She doesn't even have a name, for instance. I mean, I laugh a little because I don't really even think of there being this great tradition of American literature, although there have been some great American writers. But, you know, for each American writer, if that is such a thing, that tradition of American literature is going to be different. For me, if I could draw the graph, it would be something like Melville, Faulkner, Nathaniel West, William Gaddis, with a side trajectory to Catherine Ann Porter, who I think was a really brilliant woman and an interesting person, and was someone who had a conception of the world. You know, she lived in Mexico and knew a great deal about the Spanish-American War and Mexican politics. None of those writers are what I would think of as swimming in the redemptive, probably the opposite. Especially Nathaniel West, there is a viciousness, I think, in his commitment to exposing the underside of everything, and certainly the underside of hope. And, you know, you don't get to redemption without hope. I don't claim to have a personality like Nathaniel. I mean, I don't think of it as personality, but his sensibility as it gets expressed in his work. I wish I was so vicious, but I think I've never really even thought, I am American, but I haven't really cathected to American writing as one tradition. I read a lot of French writers, like Céline was really important to me when I was young, because his work has such a wicked sensibility, and he uses hyperbole in a way that I think really raises the bar for those moments when an author gets to be descriptive. And to render a scene, and to not worry about making it too accurate, but to give it the accuracy of real feeling rather than a sort of literal accuracy. You know, it's hard to predict. I mean, there's certain books that just have spoken to me. And I'm a rereader. That's something I've realized about myself. There are certain books I can point to. Like, it's just coming to my mind because this is, you know, an improvisatory interview. There's a book by the French poet Francis Ponge called Soap. And when I read that, it just changed my life somehow. And I think of it as a novel, even though it's a book-length poem. And I don't know what it was, but there's that recognition that you feel sometimes, even in syntax, even in the cadence of a sentence, where you feel that the author is alive to experience and to contradiction, which really inheres in all truths. And when you know that you are, or I am, the right reader in the right moment for this nuanced and complicated sentiment, that's really what I live for as a reader.